Good evening. Do I have this on? Are we on? Good evening, everyone. I'm Rabbi Joy Levitt. I'm the executive director here at the JCC, Marlene Meyerson, JCC Manhattan. And welcome to Israel Forum, where we face difficult issues about Israel and America head on with respect to the diversity in our community, bringing a spirit of civility so sorely needed right now. We are eternally grateful to Donna and Larry Linden and to the Wexler Family Foundation for their support of Israel Forum. Donna sometimes feels like a member of our staff in the best possible way, urging us to go deeper and reach higher to be our best selves, and I am personally very grateful. Just a word about our format for those of you who are new to Israel Forum. Our esteemed panel will spend the next time, a half hour, 40 minutes, we'll see, in conversation with one another. We will then break to invite you to discuss the issues that have arisen as part of their conversation with the people at your table, and to write any questions you'd like to address to our panelists following our table conversations. Please make sure to introduce yourselves to one another at your tables. We are so fortunate tonight to be joined this evening by Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, Barry Weiss, writer and editor of the op-ed section of the New York Times, and our moderator, Zachary Schaefer, the executive director of the Council of Jewish Presidents. Their full bios are on your table. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
What?
It's comfortable.
It's very comfortable.
Yeah.
All right,
We'll take a nap.
hello.
Take a nap up here.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear? Is this okay? All right. It is great to be here. As you all know, we're here to talk about anti-Semitism in Israel. But before we address that, I also want to repeat the actual intention of the evening, not just the topic. We're talking about the perennial pathology that is anti-Semitism. We're likely not going to cure that today. The real goal, it'd be nice if we did. We have two brilliant panelists, so it's possible. But the real goal of this evening is to try to model something that is increasingly difficult, and that's civil conversation across divides. We all know, just as national trends are portraying, it's harder to talk across divides, not just in America, but in the Jewish community. And specifically Israel, which once served as the civil religion, the anchor of the Jewish community, it once glued us together. It is now really the driver, the engine that is pulling us apart in many ways, and that is the cause for our division. So it's really powerful that here we are, a diverse and varied community, trying to have a conversation about that which is currently one of the most divisive topics in our community. And it's something the JCC, it's something the Council of Young Jewish Presidents really cares about, trying to convene our community or the collection of our communities for these conversations. It's a privilege to have Barry and Jeff up here on this stage. During our conversation yesterday planning for this event, they said that they happen to agree on most things. I'll be doing my best as a younger brother of four to try to instigate some disagreement. And I'm going to try to help just focus and guide the conversation, and I may try to represent some voices that aren't in this room or on this stage to just really deepen that conversation in that way. I really want to start with a question that we were just talking about back there. I actually got some criticism for this program, Jeff and Barry, as I was saying, because there was a feeling that there are white nationalists in this country trying to kill Jews and actually killing Jews, and here we are talking about our allies on the left who are critical of Israel. And it's just conversation. It's just comments. It's commentary. There's a real threat. Why are we spending our time on this conversation?
I mean, I think that that's a ridiculous straw man and a canard, to put it frankly. Anyone who read the report that came out about the Labor Party, did people read that report? Okay, if you haven't read that report, you should go home tonight. It will put you, will put you in a depressed state, but it's it's really worth reading. I think that it really puts a lie to the false idea that anti-Semitism, when it doesn't come from neo-Nazis, is somehow not real. Like, we all have two eyes. Of course there's anti-Semitism that seeks to murder us. You know, I'm very aware of that. I was bat mitzvahed at Tree of Life. I knew the people who were murdered. I, am very, very attuned to that. But the idea that anti-Semitism that, only seeks at first to marginalize Jews, the idea that that's unserious, that is a betrayal of the life of Natan Sharansky, of the experience right now in England of Rachel Riley and Luciana Berger, and I could go on and on and on. Do their lives, do their experiences not matter? I'm like constantly, I'm trying to understand in like the most generous read possible what those, including those in our community, are trying to do when they suggest that somehow by focusing on all kinds of anti-Semitism, that somehow not only are you ignoring or soft pedaling the most physically violent kind, but that you yourself are actually sort of like white supremacist adjacent or something along those lines. I think it's a bizarre accusation. I think it's something that's born out of tremendous shame and self-hatred, and I refuse to take it seriously.
I'll take it seriously.
Someone will.
I largely agree with Barry, but for purposes of this conversation,
Yeah,
I'll
disagree.
with her. Yeah. No, look, we're a fairly smart people with an apparently endless capacity for anxiety, so we can manage in our minds to have 2 or 3 enemies at once, I think, and understand the role they play from day to day,
Absolutely.
month to month, year to year. And there are 3, there are obviously 3 main groups. Barry has written about this. Other people have written about this. There's Islamist terror. There's far-right extremism. And then there's the anti-Semitism / anti-Zionism, or whatever you want to call it, on the left. It is true that 2 of those 3 pose a more immediate threat to the Jewish body as opposed to the Jewish soul. And so I do think it's entirely justifiable for us to be preoccupied with the protection and defense of actual Jewish bodies. You can't have ideas. You can't have
Sure.
you can't do anything if you're dead. And in Pittsburgh, what we saw was the Shoah in miniature, I think. And everything else, including Jeremy Corbyn, pales in comparison to that. But the interesting thing about the anti-Semitism on the far left is that it plays an unusually sophisticated role in corroding Jewish unity, Jewish sense of self, Jewish purpose, in a way that Nazism, obviously, Islamism, these don't. They actually bring the Jewish people together. The extreme leftism is interesting because it's far more clever than idiot Nazis running around in Charlottesville or wherever. It's far more interestingly insidious because it preys on certain Jewish weaknesses. So, I think it is possible to pay attention to all 3 of those anti-Semitisms at once.
The three-headed dragon, as Barry calls it.
Yeah, but just, the distinction between the Jewish body and the Jewish soul, which the anti-Semitism that targets one versus the other, which isn't something I've written about, but probably an idea that I originally stole from Jeff, like so many of my best ideas, is I hadn't made that distinction for a long time myself, right? Like anti-Semitism of the left just targets the Jewish soul. But I increasingly think I'm wrong about that. And the reason I think I'm wrong about that is anti-Zionism, right, which is the language of the anti-Semitism of the far left, that ultimately would affect Jewish bodies if it came to fruition. And more than that, you can't, the more I'm paying attention to the situation in places like London, it's very clear that the anti-Semitism that makes war initially on the Jewish soul and on Jewish civilization and on Jewish ideas and on Jewish peoplehood and Jewish self-determination leads very quickly to, what happened on Friday night when a rabbi visiting from Israel left a synagogue and was beaten on the street by teenagers screaming, "Kill the Jews, fuck the Jews." So the road from one to the other is just much quicker than
How do
maybe
you
I
dra-
had the
how do
moral
you draw that
imagination
line,
to.
Jeffrey?
I'm not going to argue that we have to be careful in our taxonomy of left anti-Semitism. There are a million different variants of it. Some are justifiable in the sense that, not the anti-Semitic part, but the criticism of Israel part. We can go into that. Where's the line? What's that invisible line? But J Street is not Bernie Sanders, is not Linda Sarsour, is not Jeremy Corbyn, is not the Forward, is not. There's a left, and there's a million different manifestations of this. The thing that we're talking about is the Jeremy Corbyn style. Labor Party, the worst manifestations of anti-Semitism in the Labor Party, for instance, or in the Women's March, the original Women's March founders who were just trafficking in anti-Semitic theory. In those cases, obviously, you before you have action against the Jewish body, you have to have the predicate. You have to have the ideas, and the ideas have to permeate, and the ideas have to be absorbed. And most people who have anti-Semitic ideas will never do anything physical against Jews. For every one of the Pittsburgh killers, there's 100 people who feel that way will never act on it. So what works on the right works on the left as well. And eventually, you are right. This is why. And we can go into this if you're really masochistic tonight.
We promise you would
We're only
humiliate
spending 2
me.
hours
No,
on
I'm not.
anti-Semitism.
No humiliate. No. I mean,
looking
I
forward
don't
to it.
use. I don't. I try not to use the term Zionism and anti-Zionism anymore for a reason that we can go into later. But yes, obviously, Jeremy Corbyn, when he argues that the BBC is biased because it starts from a position that Israel has a right to exist.
Correct.
When he's telling that to Iranian state TV, the state organ of a country that seeks the physical elimination of the Jewish state, obviously, 1 + 1 eventually gets you to 2, and 2 is physical danger to Jews.
So we're gonna parking lot a lot of what just came up: Women's March,
Yeah.
Corbyn.
I just did the whole tour.
We will
I
get to
love
that.
it.
We're
Yeah.
done. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You use the term taxonomy. I want to offer another term: hierarchy. There's often a conversation around trying to make a hierarchy of anti-Semitic threats, and that's, I think, what came out of that. White supremacism is violent, and attacks on ideas aren't. Right? We have to deal with the Islamic threat more than the threat from the left, more than the right. How do we handle conversations when people are trying to create? So what is the response when someone is trying to create that hierarchy? Is there a hierarchy, or do we just address everything at once?
Shifting hierarchy.
Yeah, 15 years ago, I think, we would agree that the biggest fear, at least, of
15 years ago, you were having your bat mitzvah.
Thank you. We wish. That's the
Closer
nicest thing he's
for
going to
me
say
than
all
Barry,
night.
but-
No, I was going to say that, God forbid someone was going to walk into your synagogue and kill
That was
people.
not a thing
that was
we
a
worried
Jew.
about 15, 20 years ago.
Okay, but if we were going to worry about that, we would imagine that person was going to be a radical Islamist.
Right.
Right? So now we worry that person's going to be a white supremacist neo-Nazi. Could it change again? Sure. These things are always shifting. I guess what I would say is that I know that someone is taking anti-Semitism seriously when they're not using it as a cudgel against their political opponents. Meaning, too often, and this includes obviously the Jewish community, those who find themselves on the political right, or who may be even sympathetic, or Trump curious, or Trump supporters, they will obsessively talk about Ilhan Omar and Linda Sarsour and Rashida Tlaib. And then there's a lot of people on the left who will obsessively talk about Donald Trump and the trickle-down effects of Trumpism. And both things are true, but I know that you're serious about anti-Semitism when you're willing to call it out on your own side.
There's an intellectual dishonesty in much of this
Right.
debate because everybody has their favorite anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Right. And then the other anti-Semite.
I mean,
is
you're
excused.
mine, but-
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I don't believe in the term anti-Semitism either, by the way, because I don't know what
I know,
Semitism is for one thing. So.
Well, it's, yeah.
All
Yeah,
right, we'll be
but
coming in with a
we'll-
dictionary
we'll-
after the
I've
break.
been using
I'd
Jew
rather
hatred.
just do a semantic discussion, although she's anti-Semitic, so we're not going to do that.
I think we did coin a new phrase though, Trump curious. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, Trump. No, yeah.
It describes my dad and a
lot.
lot of other Jews that I know. I mean, it's a very real thing. in the sense that, we're talking about Israel in part tonight, and there's just no denying that in certain ways, Trump has enacted policies that have been the fantasy of many, conservative Jewish pro-Israel supporters, and there's just no way around that.
It's really interesting because there was the one moment where that really sort of became real, I think, for a lot of people, including very, very anti-Trump people, was when he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And there was an expectation in journalism circles, in democratic circles, in liberal circles that this had to be condemned. And it's like, yeah, it is the capital of Israel. And by the way, it was moved to West Jerusalem. And anyway, I mean, it did not preclude, obviously they could have done a better job. This is from a left Zionist perspective. They could have done a better job of saying, and one day we hope to have an American embassy in East Jerusalem that's to the state of Palestine. You could have done that. They didn't do that. Nevertheless, it was very, very hard. It was very, very hard to sort of say, yeah, wish it wasn't that guy who did it, but it's done. And it was very interesting because it turned out that the world didn't end when it was done.
Nothing happened.
Nothing actually happened. It's going to be very, very hard for the next president to reverse that, obviously. So I know that was sort of an acid test moment for a lot of Jews, and this is why there are more people than you think, maybe in the island of Manhattan, who are Trump curious in the Jewish community. I don't think they're necessarily going to vote for him in any numbers. The Democrat will get approximately 74% of the Jewish vote.
Not if it's Bernie or Elizabeth Warren.
Well, I would disagree on the Elizabeth. I think Elizabeth Warren will do a lot better in the Jewish community than Bernie Sanders.
I agree with that, but I still think that if it's Bernie, you will see. I've been traveling all over the country talking to the Jews, and
How many have you met so far?
A lot. Probably most, to be honest.
Most of them? Yeah.
Most. The number of people that say to me, like, I will vote for Trump over Bernie Sanders is, it's really unbelievable, actually.
Yeah. I think the formula is the socialist or the sociopath. I think is the one that I heard someone say. And by the way, I know several people who would vote for the sociopath over the socialist. So it is a thing. Yeah. But anyway, Bernie's not going to win the nomination, so it doesn't really matter for purposes of this conversation.
I don't do any political prognosticating after Trump's win.
Yeah.
I don't know anything anymore. Yeah. I mean, it could be a 37-year-old gay man with a weird name.
I'm reasonably sure that Sanders is not going to win. Yeah. I'm reasonably
Let's
sure.
Hope.
I'm 25. Calling a 37-year-old a baby, I'm very insulted, but we'll let that slide.
You're 25.
No, I just think he's
unimportant. Unimportant. Let's keep moving.
Jeez, wow.
I know.
That's incredible.
I won't ask how long you've been in journalism, Jeff.
Yeah, longer than 25. But where were we?
Right. So no, I think where we are. I'm glad you asked.
That takes us to Linda Sarsour, which takes us to the Women's March. No.
This is never ending. We'll be here for about 6 hours. So, interestingly.
By the way, can we just stipulate?
Maybe.
At the beginning of this, are we still at the beginning?
Yes.
Can we stipulate that this is a less interesting conversation than a discussion about Judaism and Jews and theology and community and the Jewish future?
So let's jump into this.
And no, I mean because the funny thing about anti-Semites, and I spent a long time, longer than you've been alive, covering anti-Semites. They are actually boring because in order to be an anti-Semite, it's almost axiomatic that you have to be quite stupid. And monochromatic in your understanding of the world, and it just gets boring after a while. It's like, yeah, the Jews are running. I got it. And it is a constant condition.
Sure.
It's been a constant for approximately 2,300 years. It's a constant condition, and they win to a large degree when we sit around and obsess about them. I'm not saying that it's a necessary evil. We have to deal with it. We have to confront
I'm happy you were all here.
No. We have to deal with it, but it's not the conversation. Being Jewish is the conversation, not talking about, Sartre said this, that, without the anti-Semite, the Jew doesn't exist. He was wrong.
Right.
But
I'm going to put out a quick framing question, and I want to throw this to Barry too. Something we were talking about back there. I see a tension, a tension, sure, between self-preservation and self-actualization. In the Jewish community, we've talked about all of our anxiety is very focused on self-preservation. And to your point,
as a precursor,
you need it. You absolutely need it. But if that's all you focus on, then to what end? Self-preservation is a means to actualizing. So here we are. There's 200 plus of us sitting in this room for 2 hours, and we're having this conversation.
Assuming everybody here is Jewish.
Fair. There's 200 people in this room, probably predominantly Jews, but not all. And we're having thank you for that. We're having this conversation about anti-Semitism. And to your point, to what end? So I asked the question, there's thermostats and there's thermometers. We're here diagnosing a problem, right? We're looking at what the temperature is outside, but we're not actually out there trying to change the environment by having this conversation, although in a way we are. So how do we do that? What is the best use of our time? And would it have been better to send 200 individuals in this room out to New York City to grab coffee with non-Jews, with anti-Semite curious people to try to have conversations?
No.
Or would it even be better to send them to study Torah?
Jews have conversations with Jews.
Would it be better to send them
It's a better conversation.
So
to have,
what is
generally
why are we
speaking.
having this conversation? Why aren't we
Because
speaking with
invited.
others, and why
No,
aren't we
we're
studying
having-
Torah?
We're having this conversation because the Jews, and I've written about this, but I still feel myself waking up from the slumber, is like we've been sleepwalking through history. We've been on a holiday from history, and the holidays is over. And I think a lot of people are very, very disoriented and confused and sad and worried that the world that they thought they lived in or the world that they inherited is no longer that world. So I think it's okay that people feel shaken at the moment. They should. Now, it's a testament to how amazing the American diaspora experience has been for us that we're even able to have that waking up moment, if that makes sense. Meaning, things that I experienced as a kid, like I got called a kike, or, someone told me to pick up pennies, or my horn, things like that. The reason that those rolled off my back so easily, honestly, like when I was writing this book, I had to kind of go back and be like, did I ever experience anti-Semitism? Oh yeah. But they didn't traumatize me at all. And the reason for that is I so believed and was marinated in this idea that we were the shining city on a hill, we were the New Jerusalem, the founders were the new Israelites, and this was a unique diaspora experience unlike any other before. The fact that that is being now reassessed, I think, is just very significant. And of course it's true that, the Jewish people did not sustain themselves for 2,000 years by being anti-Semites. And if that's the case, and our only point in surviving is just pure survival, we should just throw in the towel. Obviously, that's true. The only point in fighting anti-Semitism is because there's something worth fighting for. But I think one of the things that is happening in this moment is because we've sort of maybe melted a little too much into the melting pot, maybe become a little too comfortable, a little too subsumed by our surrounding society because we've had the privilege of being able to, I think a lot of people are like, wait, hold on, what are we about? And, not to boomer people, but Liel Leibowitz wrote this amazing column in Tablet about this. To some extent, the generation of my parents has failed our generation in the sense, go around and ask young Jews, can they name 3 Jewish philosophers? Do they know what the Haskalah is? Can they tell you about the year the temple was destroyed? Not many. So if anything good can come from this experience of re-entering history, I think it's to use this moment to not just say, how do we fight anti-Semitism, but what are we fighting for? Who are we about? What can we uniquely offer the world? And the thing that I see that's giving me so much hope is I feel like there's a lot of young people waking up to those much deeper questions. But I think that, I'll leave it at that.
Sure. Anything on that, Jeff?
One way to fight, I've thought this for a while. The one way to fight anti-Semitism is to be Jewish. What do the anti-Semite want? No Jews. Be Jewish. But not only doing it for Dafka's sake. That's the thing.
I would translate that for the audience. I know what it means. I don't know how to translate it.
There's no translation.
It's
like this.
It's a spite.
It's like literally that.
Yeah, it's you don't want to be Jewish, therefore I'm going to be Jewish. That's just Dafka, and that's not enough. But again, I come back to this notion that we're capable of doing more than one thing at a time. You could fight multiple enemies, and you could make friends across the spectrum, and you could study and learn and be seriously Jewish. The problem, going back to something that you posed a little bit earlier, one of the problems that we have as a community, I think, and I'm not speaking as the editor of The Atlantic, I'm speaking as a simple Jew, or a complicated Jew.
A Jew.
Just a Jew. Just a Jew. Adam Pashut. One of the problems we have is that it's easier to fill a room, 200 people, if you promise them an apocalyptic discussion of anti-Semitism than you said, hey, let's get together on the West Side and talk about the Parsha. It's an amazing Parsha this week. You wouldn't believe it. Crazy stuff happens. Or let's come and we'll all learn trope. Or we'll study Rambam. I mean, I'm sorry to say it, but you can get Jews in America to do almost anything except study Judaism. It goes back to it's a larger, separate but not unrelated point. Judaism is hard. It's not easy. You have to master a lot of stuff, including a complicated language, and really complicated and very long books. And American culture, web culture, all the cultures that are colliding right now, and ahistorical culture, don't really make it that easy to do that thing, to preserve your people and your faith through study and learning and discipline. Judaism is not a feeling, right? It's a civilization. It's a theology. It's a set of texts. It's languages. It's stuff that's hard. And so the sad part is, look, it's always been sorry to go on at length
Not
about
at
this,
all.
but it's always been, this is not a comment on the group I'm about to name, but it's always struck me as sad that the largest Jewish gathering in America, in the non-Haredi world, every year is AIPAC. 15, 16, 17,000 people in the Washington Convention Center. It's fine. I'm not commenting on it, but it's politics. They're not there for Judaism, and it would be nice to see 15,000, 20,000 non-Haredi Jews gather in a stadium to talk about Judaism.
I love that idea, and maybe we should make that happen. I would just say two things. One is that I think part of the problem, going back to what I said about us forgetting who we are, I was in Northern California, and I happened to be in Marin, like an hour north of San Francisco, and I was like curious, long story, but I was looking at the JCC's programming there, and I went to look at the classes that were being offered that week. There was classes on climate change. There were classes about the opera. There were classes about, other secular culture. There was nothing about Judaism. Nothing in the JCC. That's our failing. And I think that we've forgotten the epicness and amazing world-changing story that we're a part of. I really believe in that. That is the thing that motivates me every single day.
Right. By the way, one of the proofs of that is that, this comes back to the ostensible theme, is that we have had for 3,000 plus years all the right enemies. Now, if you think about, I mean this in a very serious way. If you think about the people who hated us the most and tried to destroy us, they are now, in the full light of history, understood to be uniquely evil people.
Yep.
Hitler and Stalin, all the way back to
the Roman Empire,
Haman and the Pharaohs, right? And we understand the characteristics of people who hate us. We understand that there's something about Judaism, about Jewish people, that really got
drives
under their
people
skin,
insane.
drives them insane. And I would like to be, and if we were to be known by the quality of our enemies, we're doing fine.
But I think, Jeff, I'm curious if you agree with this. I think we have a real psychological communal problem having to do with pride. We ask of ourselves things we would never ask of any other minority group. My thing is lately is about unapologetic Jewish pride. I really think that we are missing that uniquely in our community. And maybe it comes from, the cultural DNA of being hated for 3,000 years. But I'm sort of shocked when I'll tell you a little story that I think illustrates this. Again, it's in California. I was at a Shabbat dinner in Berkeley while I was writing this book. And this woman that I was sitting next to had just come back from a permaculture retreat. I cannot tell you what permaculture is to this day, but she was very enthusiastic about it. And she was telling me about how it was so wonderful. And, there were all these people from all these different, sexual orientation, racial background, diversity. It's so great. It's so inclusive. I'm like, great, awesome. And 20 minutes in, she goes, but there's something that really bothered me. And I'm like, oh, what was that? And she goes, well, one of the organizers of the retreat was talking about how the Rothschilds controlled the weather, and he recommended a book to everyone at the retreat. And I'm like, what was the book? Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So I'm like, okay, what other group would experience that, not walk away and blow the whistle on the whole thing, but then relay the experience to me as if it was this amazing thing, except for this one little detail? Like, that's an extreme example of a phenomenon that I think is just like quite widespread in our community. And I think we should become more aware of it.
I'm not going to psychoanalyze the Jewish people right now.
Woo, Baruch Hashem.
Yeah,
Thank God.
Yeah, a general relief. But I think it's an interesting observation, and I think it's also not entirely a particular observation. Internalized oppression is a natural human response, which is to say, if you've been told for 2,000 years that you're Christ killers, well poisoners, all the things that we've been accused of, it goes in and it shapes the way you understand yourself in the world. Right. I mean, I don't want to be oversimplified here, but there's you could say that there are a couple of different kinds of Jews: those who believe what anti-Semites say about them, and those who don't. And it gets into a little bit of the conversation about Israel and how you talk about Israel and how you talk about Israel as a regular country versus as a kind of a supernatural phenomenon. Sure. And this is where you do see in conversation with some Jews a desire to show that. Now, I'm very critical of Israeli government policy. I've been since I got out of the army. I mean, I was in the first uprising. And it hasn't gotten much better since then. So this is not a political commentary, but you do see people who try to prove their social acceptability to non-Jews around them by saying those Jews are not. I'm not like those Jews. That's what Israel has become. Israel has become what Russian Jews were to German Jews here 100, 120 years ago. For some American Jews, Israelis have become that. It's the Jew I'm not like.
Sure.
And that's a psychological distancing mechanism. It's also a self-preservation mechanism.
Right.
It's like, when you come with the torches, don't come for me.
And that same phenomenon, I'm sorry, like also is playing out right here in our city, where there's been this kind of like slow rolling pogrom happening in Brooklyn that most Jews on the Upper West and the Upper East Side kind of want to avert their eyes from because they're not like us.
Well,
can you define
say things about
Barry?
Can you say it all the time?
Barry,
say things about them that most
Jeff,
non-Jews
just one
won't
second.
say.
Can you define what you're referring to so everyone in the audience knows?
Yeah, which is to say that every few days you hear a story from a place like Crown Heights. I'll give you two from this week. There was a woman waiting there's a video of it. She was waiting on the subway platform at Utica Avenue, and another woman came up to her, started swearing, screaming at her. Woman wearing a sheitel, a wig, a religious Jewish woman. And the other woman, was threatening to throw her onto the subway platform. In August, there was a man named Abraham Gopin. Most Jews do not know his name. He was walking down the street in broad daylight and was beaten in the face with a paving stone. His nose was broken. His teeth fell out. You don't hear people saying his name. 2 days ago, there was a school bus of Beis Yaakov girls, a religious school, and a bunch of other people on the street threw rocks at the school bus. The window shattered. Like, these are stories that somehow are not bubbling up outside of like HaRadyNews.net. That's a really big problem for me because there's a kind of exactly what Jeff is saying.
You wrote an excellent column about it today, but it's not the preoccupation of this city.
Yeah, but one of the reasons for that, right? One of the reasons it's an inconvenient story is that the convenient narrative is the white supremacist coming to kill us. The inconvenient one is, what do you do when the perpetrator of an anti-Semitic attack or someone that shares I'll give you an example. In this case, I'm talking about many of the perpetrators, at least that have been caught on film, are young black men. So what do you do when the victimizer is also someone that you perceive to be the subject of sort of systemic discrimination and oppression themselves? It's a much harder case. I think that's one of the reasons that it's very hard for, many progressives and liberals to talk about someone like Ilhan Omar, or even Linda Sarsour, Rashida Tlaib, because, they themselves are the subject of bigotry, not least from the president of the United States. And God forbid we would want to add to the kind of xenophobia or racism or sexism they experience. So it's just much easier, frankly, when it's a clean case of a white supremacist, which is why I think that's one of the reasons that people want to avoid those when the perpetrators are not.
Thank you. I want to jump into that. The title of her column, by the way, is Inconvenient Hatreds. It was written this morning. Check it out. That, I think, is powerful. I had a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine yesterday who's in J Street and If Not Now, and he was saying to me, we got into this conversation, and I realized the tough thing about Israel and the Jews is there is no parallel. There is really no analogy to make to what the Jewish people are and what the Jewish state is. And I want to ask this question now. I think it's hard for people to understand the Jewish state because the Jewish people are not just a religion. It's not a theocracy. It's not just a religious state, but it kind of is, and it has all of this complexity to it. And I think the challenge with that is Linda Sarsour said this weekend that one cannot oppose white supremacy and support the state of Israel, support Zionism. What she was saying in that sense, and what a lot of people are saying, is the very idea of a Jewish state is racist, is supremacist, not the politics.
And that, of course, is a racist position
itself.
So
it is an outcome, perhaps. Let's take that for a second, though. But I want to talk about the intent of that. For people who don't understand, most people do not see the Jewish people as more than or anything but a religion. And they see the Jewish state, out of that ignorance, as a religious state, as a state that was founded for Jews, as a religious people, at the expense of other religions, other people. So how do we handle? You don't see them
complaining about Saudi Arabia, but okay.
How do we handle that ignorance where there are people who are saying the reason you can't support Israel if you're opposed white supremacism is because it is Jewish supremacy. It is a Jewish supremacy in that sense. So there's a lot of ignorance out there because there's not an understanding of what Judaism is and what Israel is. And that, I think, is a source of a lot of people. I sometimes refer to the BDS movement as the ignorant led by the malevolent. I think a lot of what we're seeing here are ignorant people who are being exploited by the malevolent. How do we talk to the ignorant?
Well, hold on. There's like 5 questions there. Let's start with the supremacist thing, because I think that's important.
Well, no, I mean, look. This is when does anti-Zionism, I put scare quotes on it because it's a very inexact term, but when does anti-Zionism become anti-Semitism? When you deny the Jews something that you grant other people, which is national equality, right?
How do you handle when they don't see the Jews as a nation?
Well,
how do you
can't help if people are
They're
stupid.
wrong.
But I mean, how do you I'm asking how you explain it.
It's like you can tell people over and over again.
No, I'm asking for your answer though, because it's a real challenge. There's a lot of people who don't understand, and we need to be able to make that argument.
You made a very interesting point right at the outset of your 9-part question. I'm
only 25. I'm new here.
No, it's fine. It was very smart. But no, let me come back to the first one, and then we'll go through each one. But you said, this is a thing that people don't understand because it doesn't exist in the world outside the Jewish story. And you're exactly right in the following sense. There's never been a dead people that came back to life and then went home again.
Yes.
Right? I mean, this doesn't happen. And I mean, this is something that I learned actually not from Jews, but spending many, many hours in conversation over the last 20, 25 years with people like Faisal Husseini and Yasser Arafat. I mean, I won't go into each conversation, but here's the thing. It's like many Palestinian leaders understand the conflict in the Middle East not as the conflict between the cowboys, the Jews, and the Indians, the Palestinians, but the Jews, the Indians, and the Arabs, the cowboys.
Like if the Indians won.
In the following sense. What happened in the Middle East, this is, by the way, this is not a political commentary about what should actually be done to lead to a fair and equitable solution to the challenge here. But what happened is the equivalent of the Seminoles sitting in Oklahoma or wherever they are today, scattered around the United States, Seminoles coming together and deciding that they're going back to Florida and going back in such numbers and telling the whites and Hispanics and blacks of Florida, oh, by the way, we're home and we'd like a state and we'd like to take over Florida. The people of Florida would probably say to them, you haven't been here in 200 years. What are you talking about? This isn't your home. And the Seminoles say, actually, it is our home. This is where our people are buried. This is the center of our religion. This is where we were expelled from. That doesn't happen. And people need to understand this. What's happened is, it's really interesting, just from an analytical perspective, that as Israel has become more and more powerful as a country, and every year it becomes more powerful, it becomes bigger, it becomes more military powerful, economically powerful, it's lost more and more control of its own narrative. The narrative is of an indigenous people coming home to its homeland, and to some degree, to a large degree, to some degree, willing to share that homeland, or at least parts of that homeland, with the people who moved in after, right? But they've lost total control of that narrative, because the people who were opposed to Israel's existence have very, very powerful and clever narratives as well. So we need, in order to understand what's going on historically, you need to understand history. And I always wanted to do this exercise. I haven't done this exercise, but I would love to give very smart people a blank sheet of paper and an hour and say, write down the history of Israel. Jews, non-Jews, Americans, whoever, and just write down what you think happened. What's the story here? I think we would be prepared to be shocked, but we would still be shocked by what people don't know about this. And you can't. I mentioned this to Barry before, but I have a friend who's a former Pakistani ambassador to the United States who said that America's a remarkable place because it's the only country in which the expression "that's history" means that's irrelevant. So it is completely natural that the people of Florida would say to the Seminoles, who are walking back 200 years after the Trail of Tears, coming back to Florida, say, what the hell? What do you mean? You don't live here. You haven't been here. Your father wasn't here. Your grandfather, your great-grandmother. Nobody was here. You can't claim this as your own. But that's because we don't really understand and privilege historical memory, among other things. So anyway, that's a long spiel. But it goes to the sort of the heart of one of the things that you're getting at.
That was awesome. I love that. But I would just also say that, like, when I hear this comes up a lot in interfaith discussions, like those kind of
scare quotes.
Well, because interfaith discussions are great, but we're not a faith. That one of the problems with that paradigm, and I hear this a lot when Jews are talking about themselves, is like our faith. What? No. Judaism, as you've said, it's a civilization, and it is a peoplehood. And who's the first Jewish convert? What does she say? Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. People comes first. So I think it's extremely important, just in the way we talk about ourselves, to be more accurate.
Non-Jews find the expression atheist Jew very confusing.
Right.
Of course they do.
And I think if you're part of the Jewish community, if you understand Judaism in some deep way, you understand. Yeah, of course. I mean, you don't have to believe in God to be Jewish. You're just Jewish. And not believing in is a form of Judaism. Rebellion against Judaism is a form of Judaism, right? But if you're a Catholic and you give up God, you don't, because it's a faith community. And it's just a different thing. So it's it is very hard to explain, but that doesn't absolve people of the responsibility to explain, and it also doesn't absolve the responsibility of people to listen.
One little just language thing that
I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and then we're going to cut to questions.
That's fine. One
Conversation.
language thing that I like along these lines of not ever talking about ourselves as a faith or a faith community. One of my rabbis, David Ingber, talks about it shouldn't be Jewish conversion, because that implies, that's really about faith. It should be naturalization into the Jewish people. That's how we should talk about that process. And I really, really love that idea.
So as a Reconstructionist rabbi, I just have to thank you on behalf of Mordechai Kaplan for that extraordinarily great explanation of Jewish life. And I would be remiss if I did not tell you that there will be over 100 people here on Sunday studying Jewish texts with Art
God
Green.
bless.
And you're all invited to do that, as well as join the 150 people who are studying Ulpan here and other Jewish classes that we run. I can't help it. I'm sorry. It's my job. Please now to the audience participation part. No questions. What we're asking for now is that you spend some time at your table. First of all, make sure that everybody knows everybody's name. And second of all, discuss among yourselves the issues that, oh my God, that is truly my cell phone. Discuss among yourselves the questions that have, it wasn't my cell phone? Oh, good. Discuss among yourselves the questions that have arisen. There are index cards with pencils on your tables. Those of you who are concerned that you will forget your question before the end of this time period, please do feel free to write it down. But take your time and listen to one another.
Because we're going to be collecting the question cards now during the break so that we can have a moderated discussion of the Q&A. All right, good. All right, that's okay.
Rabbi Abby True. Discuss among yourselves. Thank you.
I was like, wait, what? No, it blew my mind. It's one of those things that blew my mind because I had never, again, I had been a cowboy Indian settlers. The West is one.
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
Oh, now do we go off stage?
Now what happens?
Oh, great.
Now we can go to, then we go get some,
That was awesome. You're hysterical. It was great.
what do we do now?
It's really, you can relax among yourselves. Anybody want any food?
Now I'll go back and get some.
Yeah, we'll let you know. You were great. Thank you. Tough one. Around here, it's like herding cats.
Do they like you?
Yes.
I'm bringing you to that.
It's great.
What?
You ready?
Yeah, it's great.
All right.
I can actually talk about like the Kardashians too.
All right, everyone.
Right.
All right. Thank you. We will stop taking questions after this one. All right, everyone. It was wonderful to go in the back room and hear just the cacophony of noise as we have this conversation. It is too rare that Jewish community programs permit the audience to participate and really tear down that hierarchy. So I really love this. We're going to jump right in. To what extent do you think the Israeli governmental policies are fostering anti-Semitism? And I will just add to that also how the pro-Israel or Jewish establishment in America responds as well.
Well, anti-Semites create anti-Semitism. Jews don't create anti-Semitism. If you're predisposed to anti-Semitism, you'll find any damn thing in the world to blame the Jews for. So it's not even, I reject the category in a way. It's a more interesting and subtle question about how Israeli policy affects the relationship between diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews, but maybe.
No, you.
No.
Keep going. You're on a roll.
No.
After the
no.
Indians and Cowboys thing, I'm like,
No,
we should just go
it's
home.
fine. I don't know. I can't answer that question because just as black people don't cause racism and gay people don't cause homophobia, Jews do not cause anti-Semitism. You can't. I can't accept the frame of the question. And for anti-Semites, there is nothing that Jews can do except commit suicide, collective and individual suicide, that would please them.
But maybe reframe it this way. Do the policies of the Israeli government make us feel more ashamed and make it harder for us to stand up for ourselves? I love you. I always love this person in the group.
You know that person?
No, but yes, I'm sure we were
in every
related.
room.
Sinai. No, but that's the real question, I think, right?
I think on a political level, look, I mean,
Does Trump make it harder to defend America in this? I mean, it's the same.
not the idea of America, not the promise of
Right.
America, not the thing, but yeah, it makes it obviously difficult to defend specific policies. I think, let me narrow it. I think that there are policies in the Netanyahu government that are hard to defend if you're a liberal-minded American Jew. And that creates a cycle. But there's I also have this counter view, and I've had this argument with my colleague Peter Beinart about this. Peter and many other people believe that Israeli policies occupation and settlement lead to the distancing of young American Jews from Israel. And I actually believe that young American Jews who are distant from Jewishness have an easier time looking at Israel as the other or as something embarrassing or as something. All that said, I mean, I just want to state very clearly, I don't agree with, this is no secret. I don't write about this anymore, but taking like a 5 to 10 year break. But it's okay because it'll still be a problem in 5 to 10 years.
Thank God.
Yeah.
We're still employed.
No, there's always work for Middle East peace negotiators, right? But I don't think that the certain policies are wise or clever or moral, and I think that those make it hard for young American Jews who believe a certain way. I had this challenge when I was in the Israeli army more than 30 years ago. I still have the challenge today. And by the way, I have the children of my friends in Israel are going to do the same damn work that we had to do 30 years ago now. So, these are serious problems. But I think you can talk about the security challenges, the moral challenges to Israel in the framework of a nation state and its problems, right? Treat Israel as a normal country with extraordinary problems rather than either a supernaturally good or supernaturally evil phenomenon that exists outside of history and normal human discourse.
I basically agree with everything. I think the one thing that runs counter to the view that I generally share about, if you generally don't have a rich or deep Jewish identity, then it's easy to distance yourself from Israel, that view of things. The thing that gives me pause about that is the phenomenon of if not now, and the groups that are increasingly cropping up of, I don't know if they would call themselves anti-Zionist or post-Zionist Jews who have like Schechter and Ramah backgrounds. They're a small group, but they're Jewishly educated and they're very, very, very outspoken, and I fear are being used in ways. Well, I'll just leave it at that.
What's interesting about them also is that it is a kind of way a return to the norm, because before the American Jewish community was Zionist, it was very not Zionist. And that was actually in the span of history of Zionism, that was a long period. So it's interesting that the tension, the natural inherent tension between diaspora community and an Israel-based Jewish community, that one would expect actually got suppressed for a long time because Israel was doing extremely well and there was not an effective pro-Palestinian advocacy movement in the world, and Palestinians were more associated with anti-civilian terrorism than anything else, and so on and so on and so on. But we're now returning maybe to a norm where diasporaism is reasserting itself in an interesting way.
Yeah. There's a lot to say about that, but
Now that we know each other so well, this isn't even a question, but Zionism. You've used the term now a few times tonight. I'm personally a very big fan of the term. I think it's something to be reclaimed and reaffirmed. Is that a helpful concept term to use in this conversation?
The only reason, and Barry I think differs on this, but the only reason I question the use of Zionism is because, so I mean the example that I always use is this: if Zionism is a political idea, it was a theory, it's an abstract political notion, right? So imagine a young couple sitting at the kitchen table talking about whether or not they're ready for parenthood, right? Oh, we don't have the money. I don't know if we're mature enough. I don't know if we can do that. That's a perfectly normal conversation for a young married couple to have. It's extremely abnormal if they already have a baby, right? Like, I don't know if we're ready for parenthood. Maybe we should. Well, if you have a baby in the next room, well, it's too late for that conversation. There's a real human being discussed now. It's not an abstract concept within the framework of a marriage. When do we become parents? We're already parents. Israel is born in 1948, right? The Zionism is the only ism of the 20th century that actually worked in achieving its goal, right? Political Zionism, not spiritual Zionism, but political Zionism is it worked. They got what they wanted. And then so the abstract idea becomes a real place. So when you say you're anti-Zionist, nobody actually carries that through. What does that mean? If you're anti-Zionist, does that mean that you're for the forcible removal of Jews from Palestine? Are you for the voluntary transfer of Jews? Are you for their physical murder? Are you for paying them off to what does that mean? Or are you for a one-state solution, which is a utopian ideal, but is not actually, and maybe 100 years from now that will be the answer. But right now, in a Middle East in which the majority population has shown over and over again that it cannot abide as equals national and religious minorities. I'm talking about blacks in Sudan and Kurds and Assyrians and Yazidis and so on. The Jewish story is just one part of that story. To think that the one-state solution is a solution means that you're somewhat not playing on the level. Like you're not looking at the Middle East as it really is. So my point is only that when you say you're anti-Zionist, that I'm opposed to this idea.
Yeah.
But the idea is concrete now. The idea is a place. There's 6.5 million Jews in that place. So what are you going to do with them if you're anti-Zionist? And that's why I think the term is kind of cleanses the conversation a little bit too much.
yeah, I agree. I think the term.
Oh, I thought you disagreed.
No, I love the way you just
This
said
went
that.
wrong.
Well, before you've said it in a more provocative way, which is that we need to
tired.
we need to retire the term Zionism because Zionism won, so it's over. That's what you've said before.
Well, no, but
But it's not over.
Well, it's over, but it's been replaced by the thing that it
But
gave birth to.
but I think the reason that it's dangerous to just say it's over, it has too much baggage, or it's bloodless, or it's or any of those things, is like Zionism is something that was called different things in the past, but the Jewish yearning to return to, for the Indians to return to their indigenous place, is an ancient thing. And I think abandoning, like, Zionism is just the contemporary word that we had for that thing. So maybe it's like, I don't know, yearning for the state. It's like, it's a shorthand for something that's quite deep.
All of Judaism is Zionism because we are a universal religion focused on a very particular place. I get that. I mean, it's all about yearning for the real and spiritual Jerusalem. I do get that. And so I don't want to, I'm not arguing for throwing out the term because it's been made devoid of meaning. I'm just saying that when people, I think it's interesting to sort of ask people who describe themselves as anti-Zionist, what is the concrete manifestation? What would be the concrete manifestation of your anti-Zionism? And then you could actually get to the conversation of, is this actually just anti-Judaism, the latest manifestation of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism?
Well, it interested me. I was at a dinner a few nights ago with a lot of, Jews, yes, obviously, some of whom are like professional Jews, some of whom are not. And there were a few people I was really surprised were like, I wouldn't call myself a Zionist. It's too loaded a word. Do you hear that? Do you guys hear that?
I don't go to the same
Yes.
parties.
Yes. No, but my younger sister was there. She's 24. She's 1 year younger than
that's
you.
so young.
Yeah, it is so young. And she was like, yeah, I hear that all the time among my friends.
Frequently.
And she's like, it separates the boys from the men. I'm a Zionist, And
But it's interesting to ask those people who say they're not a Zionist,
What
do you want to do with the 6 million Jews of Israel?
No, but they meant it in the sense of like, I'm not really, it's...
No, but that's diasporism actually. That is
the thing
that
that's
is we're going to find we're going to fulfill ourselves here. By the way, a lot of it is just conflict avoidance.
Exactly. And the thing that is killing me about this whole diasporism thing that I'm seeing on the far left is it relies on a vision of history that's just completely revisionist. Like, it imagines that there was a time where Jews were both powerless and protected. And happy. Like, this is insane. The only reason they're able to have the luxury of walking around, the West Village and calling themselves post-Zionist is because of the state of Israel.
And to be fair, a unique diaspora country.
Correct. Sure. Yes. Also, for sure, yes.
When you talk about Zionism as a living term, Barry, what is the project? What is undone? What is there left to do as a part of Zionism? Is it just saying I support Jewish self-determination and that ancient idea, or is it to say that being a Zionist is a verb, it's an active term?
That's a great question. I think it, for me, it's a verb and an active term. I guess those are the same thing. I would say that my concern for the future and the thriving, not just the survival, but the thriving of Israel as a democracy leads me to be someone that, opposes the occupation. Like, that to me is part of my Zionist identity. So, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's very much a living term, and it's something that I proudly call myself, maybe in the Dovka way that Jeff was referring to earlier.
I mean, look, it's the definition, if we want to work within the framework of the term, the definition is fairly easy. If you believe that the Jewish people have a right to a nation state of their own in at least part of their ancestral homeland, that doesn't. It's interesting that that's become a controversial idea. Put it that way.
Yeah.
So what is this is based off of a question we have. What does the conversation look like with seemingly comfortable, safe, secure Jews in America who may be assimilated to different degrees? Maybe they've woken up post what's happened in Charlottesville and Pittsburgh and Poway and what we've seen. But for a lot of young Jews, this is their home. This is where they feel safe. And the idea that there could be a Holocaust that they need somewhere to flee to is actually quite literally laughable.
Well,
they literally have no idea what's going on in the world.
Read more books.
So
how could they say?
So it's just the lack of education. Like, what does the conversation look like?
How could they look at what's going on in France and say that the state of Israel isn't necessary? That's it. How could they look at what's going on in England? I mean, 47% of British Jews say that if Jeremy Corbyn is elected, they will consider immigrating to Israel not just Israel, sorry, they will consider leaving the country and moving to other
Or to
places.
75th
Strongly
and
consider, I
Columbus.
believe.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Yeah, sure.
Right, Israel.
They can move in with me. I mean, yeah. But how could people possibly say that? Like, I just find that to be astonishingly parochial. I really do.
Well, no, I mean, it's, again, to be a Jew in this world is to know two things simultaneously. There are a lot of good people in the world, and that Jewish history is the most optimistic story in the history of humankind, because we should have disappeared with the Hittites, and we didn't. And then to hold the equally strong view that tragedy lurks around every corner, that ever since the two daughter religions of Judaism decided that Judaism was the enemy, that there's a virus in Western civilization, in Christian civilization, and Muslim civilization, and the virus manifests itself differently in different generations, and that everybody has to be aware of it. And to use your term, the holiday from history, that this has been such a sui generis diaspora experience that it's easy to forget what the norm is. This is a small story about an ignorant person, but I just find it immensely humorous. I was told recently by someone that I was talking about the ghetto, and said that I shouldn't, by a young person, very young person. I mean, young and old
Not
enough
as
to
young
know
as
better.
me, but young.
25. They told me that was an act of cultural appropriation, that I shouldn't use the word ghetto. And I was like, you might want to go to Wikipedia before you embarrass yourself further.
That's
but
history.
I mean, it's really amazing. Like, that was a Jew using the term ghetto to describe a Jewish neighborhood in Europe was an act of cultural appropriation. That's how little people
amazing.
know. That's how little people know. And so it's, you can do two things at once. You could school yourself in the history of Jews and the relationship to the outside world. And you could also not live in a bunker. It's possible to do these things.
We could also have something radical, like, I've been thinking about the Jewish peoplehood and what it looks like in the 21st century. And this question kind of speaks to it, because if you really go around believing that, it tells me that you are not attuned to the lives and concerns of other Jews. So what would it look like in our community if we had something like a year of mission to the Jewish people, like a Shnat Shlichut for the Jewish people?
Like a
where,
Peace Corps.
Yeah, like a Peace Corps for the Jewish people, where a Berliner can go to Tel Aviv and someone from London can come here, and you immerse yourself and involve yourself in the concerns and the needs of other Jewish communities. Like, it's called what?
JDC.
Yeah, JDC does great work. But I'm saying something that becomes normative in the way that Mormons go out and do their 2 years, or I think it's 2 years, of service. Like, that might be something that our community should consider. The Mormons have a lot of wisdom, by the way. They really do. Weird ideas, but a lot of like communal
Among other things,
cohesion.
they think they're Jewish, so you like that.
Yeah,
right?
I love it. I love it. No caffeine. No family game night. Brilliant. Love it.
Never went well in my family when we all got around the Monopoly board. To what extent do you think anti-Zionism on college campuses is at its base anti-Semitism? And this sort of came up a little bit, but maybe it's ignorance, maybe it's something else.
I think you had a great line about this earlier, where it's, the ignorant being led by the malevolent, I think is what you said. Look, Jewish organizations that have poured immense amount of money into fighting BDS love to pat themselves on the back and say, we've been so successful because no universities have adopted BDS. Well, that may be true, but they have failed, or maybe a few. They have failed so unbelievably in the cultural game, meaning if you go to a university campus, or most university campuses where lots of people in this room, I imagine, have kids, and you go to the activities fair in the first week or two, you sign up for all these things. You sign up for, raise the minimum wage to $15 and legalize marijuana and better rights for cafeteria workers. Oh, and by the way, BDS. Like, it's become a plank of political progressivism among young people. It just has. That's the reality. And do I think that most people that are sort of signing up or going along with that are anti-Semites? Obviously not. And I think that they imagine, because, I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe they're lied to, maybe they're not doing their homework, they believe that BDS or adjacent things are just about ending the occupation of the West Bank, when in fact, when in fact, and if you don't know this, BDS is about the elimination of any state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. So I don't know what the solution is to the campus problem, but the idea that it's overwrought is, I don't think it's wrought enough, meaning really open your eyes to what's happening. I mean, look at look at York University just banned a Zionist group on campus from organizing events, period. McGill wants one of its student senators, Jordan Wright, to resign because she's going on a Hillel trip to Israel. Don't forget that this Hillel trip to Israel, by the way, includes visits to the Palestinian territories with Palestinians.
So the lesson is don't go to college in Canada, I think.
No, well, yes. No, but there's a GW. You can read the amazing op-ed that we published in the Times by Blake Flayton. I could go on and on and on. I talk to these students every single day, and they are showing more clarity, frankly, and wisdom than a lot of people, I would say, in my parents' generation and older, who have put so much stock in the prestige of these places that I think it's too painful for them to see where it actually is. I think we need a really, really radical rethink of our attitude toward these universities. And the idea that there are very wealthy Jews giving their money to places that actively employ anti-Semitic professors is astonishing to me. I say that as a graduate of Columbia. At the time, I did not have the cojones to call it anti-Semitism, by the way. I did not. Now, when I look back at what those professors said, it's astonishing to me, actually. So I think we need to sort of think about what is more important. Is what is more important like a Harvard degree, or is what is more important fighting back against this? I mean, I think we really need to a reassessment.
What does a productive and civil conversation look like when a friend, someone who you think can be spoken to, not maybe a part of that radical 10%, says something out of ignorance that does go into anti-Semitic stereotype or caricature? How do we have that conversation in a way that disarms them, that enables them to listen to us, and that doesn't actually attack them or make them insulate? Jeff's like, I don't.
No, I don't work for the Jewish community. I mean, it's not my.
No, but I mean, if
No.
you're like at a coffee shop with a friend and they say, I'm assuming you have conversations with people. Has this ever
That's
come
a big
up?
assumption. I don't actually. I'm not actually comfortable answering the question because I'm not. I mean, this is going to sound. I mean, the role of my professional role as a journalist, my role of a journalist is not to make people feel better or not to make things. It's just to tell people the truth of a situation. Sometimes we do it well, sometimes we don't, but that's the role. I mean, so I think the same thing would hold in this case. Sure. If somebody says something that I find ostentatiously ignorant or devoid of context, I will just point them to the context and encourage them. I mean, I really. There's something that I believe is that there are really no shortcuts. That goes back to these earlier points about Judaism itself and being fully Jewish. But there are no shortcuts in this. That's why I always have this, and I'll do it one day, this fantasy of handing out a sheet of paper to 50 people and say, write down the history of the Middle East in the next hour and see what people know. Because we just...
You do run a publication. I mean, like, that'd be a great Atlantic video.
That'd be a great Atlantic video. Thank God you're not the editor.
No, you'd speed it up, and then you'd have people read them out loud.
I
Put it in
appreciate
slow
the advice.
motion.
I'm
It'll be
producing
great.
it already.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome, Jeff. You're welcome.
But the point is, there's a larger point about cognition here, which is that let's make certain assumptions about everybody in this room. Everybody in this room knows more about the Middle East conflict than the average 200 other people on the street in Manhattan or anywhere else. Well, let's just make that assumption. Just because we know something doesn't mean that other people know it, you know? And so I think part of the problem, and this, by the way, goes to this question of generation to generation passage of knowledge in Jewish families. It's like the grandparents' generation believed that Israel was the bulwark against the Holocaust. The parents' generation, I'm using generations broadly here because we're all different ages, but the parents' generation is like, Israel's amazing, Six-Day War, defeated the Arabs, whatever. that pride, the articulation of that pride, the articulation of the fear pre-1948, all these articulations never happened. They were just assumed, right? And so explanation and explication and reading and context are very, very important. We can't have, one of the reasons to avoid interfaith dialogue, in addition to the fact that I'm a misanthrope, is that the people who are participating, in my experience, my limited experience, people participating on the Jewish side sometimes don't know that much about Judaism. So I'd rather listen to a lecture from a smart person and take in information than an hour than just exchange random views about things I don't know about. And so I think what we're talking about here then is comes back to this idea of no shortcuts, and also the assumption. By the way, this cuts against the issue of malevolence on campus. Anti-Semitism is also sort of a subconscious disease. It's something that's just in the air. It's in the air of Western civilization. And so when you say to someone on campus, that's wonderful that you care about the Palestinians. We should care about the Palestinians. They've been screwed by history, screwed by everyone, including the Arabs, by the way. But it's not just an Israeli issue. But why are you not doing activism about the Uyghurs right now? 1 million of whom Muslim Chinese citizens who are literally in concentration camps, right? And then if you can enter that conversation, and if you can have a useful conversation about that, you might be able to stimulate people to think about, why do I care about Palestinians more than the Uyghurs, more than the Rohingya in Burma?
Or more than the Palestinians in Lebanon.
But because the interesting answer to this, as you know, is that people aren't really interested in the Palestinians.
Interested in the Jews.
And that's, if people were interested in the Palestinians, there'd be a Palestinian state a long time ago, hopefully flourishing, right? But this is not, it's really not so much sometimes about Palestinian. And again, it becomes a sort of a virtue signaling. On the other hand, it's a genuine human rights problem. It's a genuine problem of a nation of people thwarted in their desire to have a state. It's incredibly complicated. No one in this room wants to have that state at the expense of the Jewish state. But there are ways of having look, one of the things, sorry, I told you I wasn't going to answer, now I won't shut up.
Unbelievable.
No, I know.
But
the point is, you want to have that conversation. All you want in that conversation is that people recognize complexity.
I was going to say, with your ignorance and malevolence frame, I always assume ignorance and not malevolence. I think that's the very important thing to assume in conversation, because as Jeff just put it perfectly, most people just really don't know. Like, if you sit down, I had this experience the other day of sitting down with someone and going through the UN resolutions, right? And I think it happened 3 days ago, where it was there was 5 resolutions targeting Israel, 0 against any other.
Your dinner parties?
Yeah, that's what I do.
It's
I
really
just go and I
so
show up with
exciting.
the UN Watch Twitter. It's so fun. I'm a blast. But that's useful. Do you know what I mean? It puts the burden on us to some extent to come just so well armed, but there have been harder things that Jews have been asked to do before.
I mean, you were asking me earlier about who I hang out with due to the criticism I was getting for this program, and I think being in spaces where people are
Are you
criticizing
canceled
you
for
and
being on stage with me and Goldberg?
hashtag. So no, but I think those are important conversations. Jeff brought up a comment about L'Dor Vador, from generation to generation. There was some questions about generational divides. We look around the room, and this is an intergenerational audience,
I know.
which is frankly not that common in conversations like this. And this is an intergenerational panel.
Yay!
Yeah, please. And I mean, I run an organization that's about building multi-generational leadership. So this is beautiful. There's a question about there being 3 generations on this panel, how that plays out. It sounded
Let's not
like
overstate the case, okay? Jesus Christ.
Jeff's about two generations.
We have the greatest generation to my right.
Us, and then we have
Generations
Right.
on
The
the
greatest
stage.
So Jeff's about 3
All right,
generations
just-
older than Barry and I.
Just relax, all right?
Shouldn't have spent so much time on that question.
Yeah.
So
You should be lucky. You should be happy you're 25, not resentful.
it's a
Okay?
great age.
Yeah.
So I have to start paying for health insurance now, though. But
Oh my
another
God.
story.
Yeah. You have to buy your own
donations
phone
after the
soon,
program.
Your parents aren't going to pay for your phone anymore.
Open enrollment ends tomorrow. So your public service announcement. It sounded like what you had said is different generations, of course, have different lived experiences, and the lived experience of the pride of watching Israel win when it wasn't supposed to, of the fear of the moment when Israel might not win, right? 67, 73, and Entebbe, 48, parents having been Holocaust survivors.
Yeah.
We all have these different socio-historical conditions and different lived experiences. I think one of the reasons for the ignorance of my generation is that we haven't had many of those lived experience, and my relationship with Israel growing up is one that is dramatically different than older generations. And I want to ask Barry now, sort of in response to that, our generation doesn't have a lot of those structural social constraints to force a relationship with Israel, either because of growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust or having pride in what they see, because most people in our generation grew up seeing war in Lebanon, occupation. How do we have that conversation when the lived experience is different?
Well, we in Judaism believe that we were all at Sinai, at least metaphorically speaking. Like, no, really, I mean that in a serious way, which is to say, when you read about the Maccabees, when you read about, pick any example in Jewish history, do you see yourself in that story? Do you see yourself as having the moral imagination that, like, you can imagine what that was? Like, I think the problem is, it's like the problem's not in the heavens, or the answer's not in the heavens. What's that phrase? Lo b'shamayim, that whole thing. It's in us, meaning I hear this all the time from people, by the way. Like, we weren't alive during 67, so we can't know it. Really? Like,
So the response to that is, how do you feel about the Holocaust?
Exactly. I'm like, that the argument there is like, unless you weren't alive, in 1940s, you can't appreciate the genius of Winston Churchill. Like, I just fundamentally...
And you're certainly not indifferent to slavery in antebellum America,
right,
because you weren't alive in 1860.
Exactly. Like, I just...
It's an odd statement.
Yeah, I reject the premise, and I think that the more someone... It's a boring answer, but like, the solution to this is not like some newfangled like program or like shiny technology thing. It's an old playbook. It's called living a Jewish life and deepening your connection to Judaism, Jewish history, and Jewish people. And to me, like, that is the greatest honor and privilege of my life. That's it. That's kind of the whole game for me. So, I mean, I'm glad I got like 3.
Tepid applause for Judaism.
Yeah.
We'll make it 4.
No, but I'm just saying, like, that's it. Like, that's it. Like, drill down into that. And like, not only can you relate to the position of someone, listening to David Ben Gurion establish the state of Israel, but you can relate to, Moses, like everything. I really just kind of feel that way.
But you're an historical Jew.
But what other kind of Jew is there to be?
Well, but this is...
Like a bagel
look,
Jew?
Look,
Like,
what is the...
I just need to take a pause on the bagel comment and say that Barry Weiss was eating a cinnamon raisin butter bagel earlier. So as far... I don't want to Jew shame, but as far as bagel Jews go...
I'm not one, apparently. I'm a very bad one.
Sorry, Jeff, we were talking about something important.
No, but a historical Jew, right? Like, can we even imagine having said that you're not a historical Jew up until like 2 seconds ago? Like, you can only be a historical
No, I know, but that's the challenge of being Jewish in America, a place where everything is perpetually new, especially in this era of technological change. There's more information, current information, coming at us now, good information and bad information, than ever before. And there's no bandwidth anymore to understand things that happened even 10, 15 minutes ago. Name a controversy from 2 weeks ago, it feels like it could have been 4 years. And so everything in our culture militates. Judaism is very countercultural to the dominant American lifestyle or dominant American approach to the world.
But what's amazing in that... Sorry, Jeff.
No. It's it's just one more challenge. But I mean, I come back to, Barry has when you have a sense of history, you understand that all of these challenges that we're talking about are really
Nothing.
Not compared to living in Warsaw in 1940, or by the way, living in Sderot today. I mean, one of the issues and one of the things I worry about, just as a person who has American Jewish children, who has friends who I served with in the Israeli army who have Israeli Jewish children. My kids are in university here. Their kids are in the army there. It's just such a fundamentally different experience. The geography, geography is destiny to some degree, and these experiences are so profoundly different that I'm actually, in a way, surprised that these cleavages or these rifts or these anxieties that seem to be apparent now are only still in an emergent phase.
Yeah.
There's, it's surprising how unified the Jewish people still are in the main. I mean, if you look at polls of American Jews, 95% of American Jews say they call themselves supporters of Israel, right? Maybe that number will change and diminish, and the definitions are elastic, but I don't know. I mean, it's a challenging time, but the challenge is born of twin successes. An America that's unlike any other diaspora experience, and the reborn Jewish state.
What I also think is just true, the two things that sort of guarantee Jewish continuity is Judaism, religious practice, and Zionism. Like anyone that's not connected in those ways.
Well, I don't know about Zionism. I don't know.
Would you say
Oh,
Israel?
I think so.
I don't
Israel,
know.
I mean.
I don't know. I mean, I don't. Well, let me put it this way. Do you think that...
I think without one of those two things or both.
Do you think that there could be a strong Jewish community in Seattle for the indeterminate future that had no particular connection to Israel, didn't think about it, didn't go there, didn't whatever, but had a strong connection to Jewish faith, practice, language?
Yes, but
Okay.
I don't. No, I'm saying Judaism or Zionism.
Oh,
as the
I thought,
things.
okay. I thought you were saying Judaism and some
Meaning
sort of form of
the
Zionism.
Haredim in Brooklyn that don't think that much about Israel, we know they're having a lot of kids. Like they're carrying forward, they're going to be part of like the saving remnant of the American Jewish community. Something I think a lot about is who else among us are going to be part of that? And who else among us are going to have, you don't think about this? You don't
Think
care
about it
this?
all the time.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't want to end on that note.
Did you want to? I have a great positive question. Don't
Okay,
worry.
great.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Tell us something. Tell us a joke. No. Tell us.
He has a lot of those.
What gives you hope? And I hate to end on such a trite question.
Come on, I'm a journalist. Don't ask me for hope.
Barry, you're not. You're like 3 generations younger. You're still. You still have optimism.
Barry, you're 60 years younger than he is. Tell us what do you think?
Honestly, what gives me hope is I talked a little bit about. I could talk for a long time about what's going
I'll
on
give you
on
a serious
campus,
answer in a second.
but first of all, what gives me hope is like we are the luckiest Jews in all of history. Period. No matter what is going on right now, as Jeff just said, it pales in comparison to what our ancestors experienced. I am aware every single day that my life is a miracle to my great-grandparents. Like they would not believe that I go to work at the New York Times every day and I never check my Jewish identity at the door. Like that's unbelievable. So that's one thing. And being aware of that just makes you take everything else in stride. The other thing is that we are alive. I said it in a flip way before, but I really mean it. The reason that we're able to have so many of the conversations that we have with so much confidence is because we were alive during the Jewish return to political sovereignty. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of the way that has changed fundamentally our position. The other thing that gives me hope is, I referenced them earlier, but these student leaders that I meet who are meeting unbelievable challenge and hostility with incredible courage and bravery. And there is a pattern. The students that are able to do that are the students that exemplify everything we've been talking about that actually matters, meaning they've had Jewish educators, Jewish camping experiences, Jewish schooling, Jewish mentors, Jewish heroes that have given them a sense of what they are fighting for. If you don't have that sense of who you are and what you're about and what the stakes are and what your place is in Jewish history, it's just not going to happen. Those people are going to shrink and fade away, generally. So that gives me hope, meaning it's a big investment, but the program meaning the program of Judaism and Jewish life, it really works. And I see living proof of that every single day.
You know, in the seed of every, in success is the seed of defeat, because history is not an arrow flying forward. I mean, we've kind of learned this in the last 3 years in this country. It's a cycle, you know, and you learn something and then you forget it, and then you have to learn it again, and then you forget it. What's hopeful about the Jewish story in the world is I mean, Israel is a victim of its success in a lot. It's Jewish success. It's a victim in certain Jewish quarters because of its success. There are no captive Jewish communities in the world for the first time in 2,000 years because of the military power and sovereignty of Israel and the political and economic power of American Jewry. Okay, the few people in Syria, and there's a small,
There's
tiny
the one guy
Iranian-
in Afghanistan
There's
still.
two guys. I thought
No, the
guy
one died,
one
and they
died.
fought, and now the one guy's there.
But you know, when you say to people, well, we, the Jewish people, need an Israel as a safeguard, as a homeland, a place of refuge, and I said, why would we need a place of refuge? Everybody's doing fine. It doesn't. That's fundamentally ahistorical. Obviously, the reason that there are no Jewish captive communities is because of Israel, and so that becomes a challenge. But the challenges all seem to grow now out of Jewish success rather than Jewish failure, or many of them do. And so I suppose that's helpful. And I just would attach myself to Barry's remarks about being very lucky. We get to live here, we get to live there if we want, we can go wherever we want and do whatever we want. These are historically anomalous experiences for Jews. We have the luxury of sitting in this beautiful building and talking about these things with a minimum of fear that somebody's gonna try to kill us. Minimum, but you know, it's still there. No, I mean, like, we have to, post-Pittsburgh, and I'm sitting next to somebody who is connected in such a visceral way to that community. It was, to a lot of people, it was shocking and surprising. To me, it was shocking, not surprising. And so we have to live with that shadow, but this is, I would just echo that. This is the greatest time to be Jewish in the history of our people, probably. Or at least since the exile, the original exile, and the only other point I would add to that is that we get to watch, and this is extremely interesting, if nothing else. We get to watch the Jewish people change in front of our eyes, and the balance now is tipped. There are as many Jews or more Jews in Israel now than there are in America, and in another few years, Israel will have more Jews than the entirety of the diaspora, and we're watching something enormous and fascinating. The return of the Jewish people to their original state, meant in both senses of the term, and that is a fascinating thing to watch. It's perilous, and it's exciting, and you know, and not to participate that, even in a kind of dissonant way, but in a positive dissonant way, seems to me a wasted opportunity, because we've been born into this opportunity, and that's pretty rare, and our ancestors would have loved to have been in our position.
Thank you.
On that optimistic note, I want to thank all of you, all generations, all 8 generations, everyone we have here in the room for coming here.
However high they go.
Thank you to our amazing speakers this evening. Thank you to Donna and Larry and everybody for making this possible, including the staff here for making this possible. Please come back. All the programs outside in the hall, Sunday and beyond. Thank you for joining us here at the JCC.